What's going on, guys? Steel here. Today we're going to compare the XM8 to a lot of its contemporary light tanks and wheeled vehicles within a plus/1 battle rating bracket, which means 8.3 to 10.3. The rules of this comparison are tanks that are only main caliber gun equipped, so no IFVs, no autocannons, no ATGMs. Some nations don't have a proper light tank. In the case of Russia, they just have the Object 685, so that is about the lowest in battle rating we are going for comparison. Other nations like Germany, which has 2 TAMs, I'm only comparing this to the TAM 2C, not the first one. When it comes to thermal generation, I'm going to be rating them on quality, considering resolution of thermal will change your perception depending on the resolution of your monitor. I run a 1920 by 1080 monitor, so take with that what you will in comparison to your monitors. In terms of quality, it's going to be bad for Gen 1, medium for Gen 2, and good for Gen 3. And there are some different resolutions in there for generation. I'm pretty sure the Type 16 and the Leclerc both share Generation 3 thermal, but the resolution is slightly different. So that's pretty much how we're going to rate them. It's just a rough estimate of their generation. Do note that some vehicles we just couldn't get our hands on for this test. Things like the VFM5 and the SK105. So some vehicles will be left out. In terms of wheeled vehicles, the Radwagon 90 and the Type 16 are some of the best wheeled vehicles in game for mobility. So take the performance of those in comparison to the XM8 and then compare them to other wheeled vehicles later on, because obviously if the best of the best are outperforming the XM8, then you can just assume that lesser wheeled vehicles will be either a little bit better than the XM8, on par, or maybe worse. Mobility comparisons in War Thunder for wheeled vehicles sunk simply because of Gaijin's horrible terrain resistance that they've done over the past couple of years for vehicles. Wheeled vehicles just really aren't comparable on rougher terrains other than the streets. Only the Radwagon and the Type 16 really seem to be unaffected by sand and snow, comparable to the other wheeled vehicles in the game. Since this is a US light tank, I will be comparing this greatly to the HSTVL and also to some extent the Stryker, because one is a diesel and one is a turbine, so obviously their mobility will be different. However, the XM8 is currently still up for some changes in terms of its mobility, its firepower, and the position of the smoke grenades with the level 3 armor, which we will also get to in one mobility test, and I will explain that when we get to it. But yeah, this vehicle is just not in a state that I think it's ready to be in, and I think Gaijin will probably change it in the future. Starting off with C76A1. Currently, this is the top round of the XM8. This is also the top round of the VFM5 and the mid-upgrade round of the Stryker. C76A1 is definitely just a 9.0 round. For the XM8 being 9.3, this just honestly kind of sucks in a full up tier in a 10.3. This round is not sufficient at all. Now, I know this is a light tank and you shouldn't be firing at the front of MBTs, but in the event that you do stumble across one and you do need to penetrate any MBT that isn't Soviet, this is definitely going to struggle. I like to compare round penetrations at 1,000 meters at 30 and 60 degrees. I don't really like doing flat penetration since that virtually doesn't exist for flat armor at top tier. So at 1,000 meters, C76A1 pens 265 millimeters at 30 degrees and 182 millimeters at 60 degrees, with a ricochet chance of 81 degrees. Now, I may be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure the XM8 was supposed to use M900 or M833 for its actual service career. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe it's actually M900, not M833. So we're going to compare it to M900, since that is what's on the Stryker as its top round. And for being 0.3 lower, the fact that it has M900 and the XM8 doesn't is pretty insane. Having at 1,000 meters, 425 millimeters of pen at 30 degrees and 291 at 60 degrees is far above C76A1 in terms of performance. 100% chance of ricochet is the same at 81 degrees. This is pretty much standard on all NATO tanks. So take with that what you will. The fact that it's 0.3 lower and gets this kind of round is pretty ridiculous. And now I understand that the Stryker plays differently since it's a wheeled vehicle, but all more mobile, not supposed to get shot and take shots kind of vehicles in War Thunder all really play kind of the same in terms of how War Thunder's maps are designed and how games work, objective based, whether it's domination, battle, or conquest. And in comparing the XM8 to the Stryker, the XM8 only has bad gunner thermals, and that's it. It does not have commander thermals like the Stryker. The Stryker has good driver, gunner, and commander thermals. And for being 0.3 lower, again, that's pretty ridiculous that it's that much better. The Stryker should be at least a 9.7 tank. Here we have the HSTVL's round, which is XM885, and this is on a 75, a high velocity 75, so the penetration is going to be drastically worse than C76A1, but considering that the HSTVL has an autoloader, which I believe is 6 or 7 rounds, not to mention the loading mechanism of the HSTVL has been improved since its release. The HSTV also has CITV thermal. Even though it is still only bad quality, having commander thermal is much better. The HSTVL is much lower profile than the XM8, which allows it to sneak around. It also has a maximum of 17 degrees of gun depression, which allows it to be perfect for peeking over hills and putting a few shots into the enemy. The only pro of the XM8 in terms of firepower is that it can constantly reload at 5 seconds. The HSTV's autoloading mechanism is much longer, but the burst fire is much higher. But in the long run, sustained fire, you would want the XM8. Here we have 3BM25. This is the round for the Object 685. If you've ever played the T55A or T55M, you're already familiar with this round. It's a pretty decent round. It is an 8.7 vehicle, not 9.0. So definitely in an up tier, this definitely does struggle, but for the 100 mil, this is a very reliable round. At 1,000 meters, it pens 238 millimeters at 30 degrees sloped. At 60 degrees at 1,000 meters, it is 112 millimeters. With a 80 degree 100% chance of ricochet. So slightly worse than the NATO rounds. It definitely, again, is a very mediocre round when it gets up tiered, but it's very sufficient at its own battle rating. The Object 685 does not have any sort of thermal imaging, only night vision with an IR spotlight, so the XM8 definitely in a night battle beats this thing by a large margin. Here we have DM63, which is featured on the TAM2C. The TAM2C gets medium quality commander and gunner thermals, so it's definitely a step up from the XM8 in terms of quality, and also having Gen 2 CITV is by far better because the light tanks have the scouting ability, so being able to see at night with that and being able to scout targets is pretty important. DM63 is also the most powerful 105 round outside of M900 that any nation gets. This is also featured on the CM11 for the Chinese. At 1,000 meters, it pens 351 millimeters at 30 degrees, and at 60 degrees, it pens 240 millimeters. This is definitely a very solid round. And honestly, I would like to get myself a TAM2C because it looks like a very fun light tank. DM23 is only just slightly better at closer ranges in comparison to C76A1, but at 1,000 meters, it is 272 millimeters at a 30 degree slope versus C76A1's 265 millimeters. DM33 for the 105 is definitely better than C76, with a 1,000 millimeter penetration at 30 degrees of 328 millimeters, and at 60 degrees 225 millimeters. DM33 is featured as the top round on a few vehicles like the Centaur Moore and the Radwagon 90. It is a very solid round. The Japanese designation Type 93 is pretty much identical. It is only just slightly worse overall. However, the Type 16 gets the best generation thermal in the game of any wheeled vehicle that is equipped with a 105. However, for the 120 millimeters featured on the Centaur MGS and the CV90 120, CL3143 is the best round on any light tank in the game. At 1,000 meters, it's 507 millimeters at 30 degrees, At 60 degrees, it's 347 millimeters, with the same ricochet chance as pretty much all NATO rounds. So this is definitely tops the round. But of course, the Centauro and the CV90 are both 10.3 tanks. They both have some of the best thermal in game for 10.3 vehicles that are not an MBT, for both the commander and the gunner. I'd hate to leave out France, so they get an honorable mention with the SK105, which carries OFL 105G1. It's honestly a pretty solid round considering what France has. At 1,000 meters, it is 275 millimeters of penetration at 30 degrees, and at 60 degrees, it is 188 millimeters. So yeah, sorry France, but you still don't really have a 9.0 worthy light tank. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the SK105 has a medium quality thermal, although it might be on the Gen 1 kind of side. I'm not entirely sure. I only played it once on the dev server, and I quite frankly don't remember. So correct me in the comments down below. Now on to the mobility tests. For this test, we used cargo port, and this is for the solid proper road ground. This is completely flat. For other tests, we use Sands of Sinai for sand, Volokholamsk for snow. We did not use Finland since it doesn't have a nice flat area long enough. Volokholamsk, I understand, has not been in rotation, but it was the best I could come up with. Now, as you can see, in acceleration with the level 3 package off, all of our vehicles, by the way, are completely spaded, if I didn't say that before. And I'm just completely in the dust. The Type 16 zooms ahead. The Centauro MGS is doing quite well itself. The Object 685, funny enough, completely beat me. I did have to recorrect in the beginning to go straight. This thing is very, very overcorrection-y. I think the VFM5 does the same thing. The next set of vehicles is the Centauro Romor and the TAM-2C. The TAM-2C, I'd say, is pretty much the most comparable light tank to the XM8 that is not of American design as well. Both have 105s, both have roundabout the same kind of mobility, same kind of concealment, although the 50 cal in the XM8 does kind of give it away. And I do actually, surprisingly, beat them both in acceleration. The Centauro Romor is completely weighed down by that ERA, which is just ridiculous. I thought I was actually going to outrun the TAM-2C, so I'm fairly impressed. The acceleration of the XM8 is pretty much the biggest debate right now. I know Spookston compared it to the VFM5, which both share the same engine and transmission as far as I'm aware. However, the gear ratios just seem to be weird on the XM8, while the XM8 is also apparently a lighter vehicle. This is Spookston's little clip that he sent on the content creator Discord in comparison for their accelerations. And as you can tell, the XM8 is just oddly sluggish. This was on the test drive, of course, both vehicles fully spaded as far as I'm aware. We'll play it one more time. The RPM is definitely something to be desired. It's just weird how it's accelerating differently when they share the exact same transmission, as far as I'm told. Now on to our final mobility test, which is the XM8 versus both of Sweden's CV90 light tanks, the CV90 120 and the CV90 105. The CV90 120 depicted in this clip actually did not have his engine and transmission upgrades, but later on when we test in the snow, another CV90 120 that came on later was actually spaded and was able to test it with us. But still, even here without the engine and transmission upgrades, he still beats me in acceleration, although I do end up overtaking them both in top speed. Here we are in Sands of Sinai. We have a Type 89 with us, just because that was what he had. I didn't really want to test wheeled vehicles on sand, and of course the Stryker comes to join us. The Object 685 did surprisingly well. The CV90 105 ends up kind of overtaking me because I wasn't paying attention. There was a little bit of a map rework a couple patches ago on Sinai, and I kind of missed the turn. But overall, on top speed, the XM8 is surprisingly good. I don't know if they buffed it since the previous video. I'm not entirely sure. But definitely in top speed, it is quite nice. Especially going uphill on sand. Now for the final environmental test that was conducted without the level 3 armor, we're on Volokholamsk. And Volokholamsk is not very even. It's definitely better than Finland, but we kind of just did a little bit of an acceleration test. We didn't really try to go to some endpoint, so here's what it looks like. The XM8 does get a decent acceleration start off, but the CV90-120 is definitely the king of snow. And that's pretty much how our little race here went. The CV90-120 is definitely, obviously battle rating wise, one of the best light tanks in game. So the mobility here kind of shows it, especially in wintertime. I mean, it is Sweden. They do get some pretty rough winters up there, so obviously you would want your vehicles to handle it better. But then I do kind of overtake him, and I'm pretty sure this is just due to the terrain. Now for our final test, this is with the level 3 armor. And this is on Mozdok, and as you can see, it's just, this thing is just a sloth. The Stryker even overtakes it, and the Stryker cannot take its armor package off. I did lose my clip of it on the cargo port test, but I actually beat it anyways without the level 3 armor. But here, the CV90-105 is actually, for some reason, lagging behind. I think it had to do with the transition of the terrain. Yeah, this thing is just, with the level 3 armor, it doesn't really provide any sort of protection at the battle rating that you're at that's really worthwhile, and it slows you down just massively. So don't even bother with the level 3 armor. You also lose the smoke grenades, which just makes it even worse of a choice. And here we are finally on cargo port one last time for the real final test between the two most contemporary US light tanks, the HST-AVL and the XM8. America experimented with US light tanks a lot, and quite frankly, I don't really think there's a better comparison for what you're going to play in the same tree. What you're about to see is pretty much just going to show you what the XM8 is like in comparison to the HS on every terrain. He just keeps going and going and going and going and going and going. Now I know I missed a few things, but this is pretty much the gist of it. This is what you're going to get out of the XM8. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know if you decide to keep it or if you're going to sell it or whatnot. Yeah, honestly, I'm quite disappointed. So, yeah. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Stu Wolf, and I'll see you guys next time.